Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's lecture. So right now, what I have started up is a quick poll just to see how many of you actually got this question correct. So remember the last time we had this lecture, I asked everyone to please try and attempt this question, specifically question paper B, the one with the golf tournament question. And as you can see, we then went through question 1, and we had a very brief discussion on session for question 1. And then I asked you to please try and go for the weekend, attempt this question and see how far you get in terms of implementing such a record structure. So with this question paper on the side, you can then compare this question with the code that I have here in front of you. And so the idea is, it looks like the majority of you that are present in the session have indicated that you've got your record structure correct. 2 of you did say that you got it incorrect, and then 2 of you, including Mr. Libya, did not try this. Okay, now in addition to that, before I proceed with this particular question, I would just like to remind everyone that we ran a mock semester test scenario for you all on Friday afternoon during the practicals at 2 o'clock. Please remember that regardless of which session you attend in your practicals every week, when we were still coming to sessions, you should realize that everyone is going to write at the same time, which is at 2 p.m. in 2 weeks' time. So next Friday, you are going to be writing that second semester test. So this is it's time. Time is coming. The second semester test is coming up soon, and so please, ladies and gentlemen, try and attempt these questions on your own. Practice as much as possible, but also we are allowing you to try out the test environment on Eve. So if some of you here have not attempted the mock test, you have until tomorrow afternoon, I think about 12 o'clock, to please try and go through the mock semester test. I know it is not for marks, but it is really for you to make sure you get everything correct, you understand everything, so that when it comes to the actual test in next week Friday, you are going to be able to handle that correctly. Okay, so Jay Oliver mentioned that they cannot access the mock test. Well, I think what should happen is please just try and visit Discord and type up the queries as to why you're not able to do so. But please remember that in order for you to access the mock test in the file storage area, you do need to use a special password. That special password is available to you under the marks, and all this information is in the semester test guide that we have uploaded last week. So for those of you who have not attempted the mock test, this is really important that you know how to work in the testing environment on Eve next week Friday. You do not want to wait until next week Friday to find out that you've got this issue, because you've got 3 hours to concentrate on a test. You do not have 3 hours to concentrate on the test and try to figure out how to use Eve to upload and download your tests. All right, so please, you have until tomorrow afternoon, I think about 12 o'clock or maybe 1 o'clock. Mr. Libera and I have to see who else is using the system, but please try and do it before then. The idea is, please make sure you know how to download the question, make sure you know how to upload your solution, and how you can load a backup of your practical to the Google form. So ladies and gentlemen, please make sure you do this. For those of you who are joining late, please play the video of this announcement again. Maybe Mr. Labia type up an announcement on Eve on the notice boards. Maybe we'll even upload a lecture that says the test or something, just to encourage them to click on it and see that they have to try and do this practical, this mock test. All right, so having said that, we are going to All right, let's just see. There's a question. I noticed that in practicals, if you have handwritten the code, they leave the UJ grid debug state false, mark allocation blank, which in turn you lose the 2 marks in the total mark allocation. Not sure what you mean by that. Mr. Libya, can you take a look at that? All right. Look, ladies and gentlemen, time is, we don't have much time because, as I've mentioned, you're writing the semester test next week. So let's focus on answering this question here in front of you, which is over here. We've now said, okay, fine, we've got our record structure. This is what the record structure should look like. But let me quickly go through this question so that you all understand or are at least on the same page when it comes to defining this record structure. So you will recall that we are creating, first and foremost, a record structure for each player. There, it is a record structure for each player. And this record structure for each player in this particular example, because we've gone through this last time, is it will contain a player name for the player, the age for the player, as well as the data for each tournament that this player has participated in. Then there is the worst tournament of the player, as well as the player class for that player. So you can see that there's A, B, C, D, E. So in other words, there are 5 fields for the player record structure. But in addition, each player has tournament information that they need to capture, and that is the tournament name, the par per hole, and the shots per hole. So those two we discussed last time already indicates that these two are first and foremost arrays, but these two arrays will be the same size because they are per hole. In other words, if this up here there are 3 holes, then you know that this one will also be 3, because you're not going to have 3 holes here at a tournament and suddenly a different number of holes at the same tournament at that same tournament. All right, so that is why you can see here in this particular code, particularly lines 8 and 9, I have defined 2 dynamic arrays, and you can see at the end of both lines I have, as a comment for myself, reminded me that the dimensions of par and strokes are both in H to represent the number of holes there are in this array. All right, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. These are 4 fields, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think the name and the par per hole and the shots per hole, those 2 arrays, and then the total holes under par, that is C question 4, and you had read through the entire question, you would have then identified that the data type for that last field there would have been an integer. So there you see, these are my 4 fields for this record structure for the tournament. And then you can see here there are my 5 fields for the player, specifically the name, the age, which we talked about, the tourneys, which remember each player participates in more than 1 tournament, and so this is a tourneys, open bracket, close bracket as tourney, and you can see the size of that array happens to be NT to indicate this is however many tournaments there are for this player, right? And then it was a worst tourney as well as a player class. These are all both also integers. So in total, how many dimensions do we actually have just looking at these 2 record structures? You have 2 dimensions, of which 1 dimension is used twice. Okay, so that's something else you need to realize, that just because you have an array, despite the fact that you've got 1 array there, 2 arrays, and 3 arrays so far, this does not mean you are going to use 3 different dimensions in this particular example alone. Now remember, you have more than 1 player, and that is why on line 19 we declare an array of players. That's where my 3rd dimension is. But that means in total, 1, 2, 3, 4 arrays. We've got 4 arrays, but in terms of dimension, we don't have 4 dimensions. We have 3 dimensions for the fact that lines 8 and 9 are using the same dimension. So please make sure when you read the question carefully if you actually read the question here, you will see there's nothing tricky about it here. It doesn't go out of its way to say, hey, let's try and trick you into thinking that there's a different dimension for Roman numeral 2 and 3. In fact, it says per whole. That should tell you that these two are actually the same dimension. Okay, so having done that, this is where our record structure is, and hopefully those people who did not get it correct, you will now see where you have gone wrong. Hopefully it really is just a case of you incorrectly indicating that these two dimensions are different, because this is technically the only new work you are working with. But how do you avoid mistakes like making these two incorrect, two different dimensions? Well, it boils down to you reading the question correctly. Okay, so just read the question carefully, follow the instructions as is. It will hopefully make sense when it comes to you implementing. Remember, when you implement, you're following instructions. You're following what we want you to do, so please do so. All right, now for my design, I've already implemented my design, and I have left the button determine if the pattern exists in here, because if you look at this question paper, you will note that on the last page, question 8 actually asks you to figure out if there's a pattern that exists in this particular array. And as Mr. Lebier and myself have indicated to you multiple times, question 8 will not be asked for you in the semester test or an exam. We have moved this particular section to the second semester in Informatics 1B. So please don't worry about this. However, I have left the button here in there. And the reason why I left the button in here is because you can then see, if you had to do the entire question, what should the interface actually look like. Now, most of the questions you've answered so far, everything was displayed in the UJ grid. Nothing was displayed in a text box. All right. And so if you take a look at this text box here, what actually is displayed? Well, if you read the question here carefully, you'll notice that this question would have led to a single answer. In other words, one answer is calculated alone. Whereas in all the other questions, you can see that all the other questions actually have an answer for each something or something. All right, then let's go through the questions, the comments here. So P. Zwane is asking, what is the meaning of the DT? I am not sure what you mean about the meaning of the DT. What DT are you referring to? I think you're going to have to either speak up and ask your question, or you're going to have to type out what you mean. So while you're doing that, I'm going to read the next question. Okay, KS Lutchman says, Prof, if there's time of the lecture, could you please explain question 4 of Prac 10? It's quite confusing. All right, that we'll have to do that later. J. Oliver, similar question to 8 is in practical 10. Should we leave it out? Yes, J. Oliver, you're right. So in practical 10, you will see that you have anything to do with finding a trend. So Ia Omar, you're all on the same question. Wherever there's a question to find a trend or determine a pattern in an array, you can leave it out because you will not be able to answer it at this point in time. Mr. Lebier likes to present it as a challenge. So I would say that rather don't attempt it now, but if you want to try it during the holidays, please do so. Okay, and then please run it to the record structures I'm used to rec. Well, DT, okay, that's what you're asking. Okay, DT actually stands for data type, because a record structure is effectively a data type. It is a type of data. That is what it means. So the correct term, the generic term to describe record structures and so on is that your integers, your string, everything there is a type of data. So DT is data type. All right. When you define your own tournament, it is a data type. All right. Okay. So having said that, let's proceed with the actual code. which is over here, initializing your program. Okay, you know you're getting this question. And for those of you who don't want to use text boxes in your form, that's fine. But remember, then you need to capture it using input boxes. So the first button will always be initializing the program. That means 3 things, okay? And I'm sure all of you should be able to memorize. You memorized it. You can tell me, throw it back at me now. And the first thing is, number 1, find out what those dimensions are. So in my question, I've already identified that there's not 4 dimensions, there's 3 dimensions, which is why in my text box, I have 3 text boxes. Now, if you are not sure from reading this question 1, that this is indeed only 3 dimensions, question 2 will help you confirm that. How so? You should read this question. But if you're going to be super lazy and go, no, I don't really want to read the question, that's already making a big mistake, because the point of this is when you get the semester test, you're going to get lots of words. You're going to get lots of sentences in your question paper. Read through it, highlight it, those of you who have you're going to download this electronically next week. Do what Mr. Lebeer does. Open it up in, and my suggestion to you is open it up in something which is a program that can open your PDF. Okay, so I've got Adobe Acrobat here. I've got the Pro version. You don't need the Pro version. Mr. Lebeer doesn't have the Pro version, but he uses whatever version he's got. He doesn't even use Adobe. There are many different PDF programs, and use the things like I think there's an option to comment your code. Okay, mine is a little bit more confusing, but the idea is you can comment your code and you can highlight. So highlight the things if it makes it easier for you to read. So you can see I'm highlighting. Oh, there. Okay, not the best thing to highlight, but just to show you, you should be able to highlight your text. All right, Mr. Lebeer uses Foxit Reader, which I believe is free. So if you really want, what we can do is we can also post on Eve to indicate how you can download Foxit Reader. But the idea is highlight your text so that you highlight and understand exactly what it is you need to process. But the point is, if you have read through this question over this weekend, you would have picked up, because I'm not going to spend this time, your precious data time, reading these things to you, but you will pick up that there is actually input, the number of players, there is the number of tournaments, and there are the number of holes. And this actually should be picked up in the question that you read here. But if you're not going to read the question, well, please read the question. But if you read through the question and you're still confused, then look at the mark sheet, because the mark sheet will tell you, it will give you the answers. Input the number of players, tournaments, and holes. Then for 2.2, for 5 marks, is to set up your dynamic arrays. For another 2 marks, you need to set up the UJ grid. In other words, set up how many rows and columns there are. And then for 3 marks, you need to label them. Now, notice this particular question. It actually mentions here at the end that you have to use your players as your rows and your tournaments as your columns. This is not a suggestion. This is your mark sheet. So that means you have to answer it as we tell you to. So when you did your design, you make sure your players are player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, and then in your columns it would be column 1 is tournament 1, tournament 2, tournament 3, and so on. All right, so having said that, this, ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this. This is basically more than 10% for doing this part of the question. All right, so let's go here, click on this button and work through that code. So remember, you've got your NP first. So what you might want to do is you want to comment your code. So you can say this is question 2, initialize program. All right, NP is equal to cin players.txt. Then you have nt is equal to cin tournaments.txt, as well as nh is equal to cin holes.txt. So that is the first part. That, ladies and gentlemen, just doing that correctly gives you 2 marks, 2%. And I know some of you are snobs now and you go, 2%, that's not a lot. No, it isn't. But if you don't do this part correctly, you don't get full marks for this question. You are either throwing marks away or you are setting yourself up for failure, because remember, by now you should all realize that whenever your program crashes later on, due to an object does not exist. Mr. Lebier, perhaps you can mention what it is. The error, object array out of bounds or something. The point is, it's because you didn't set up your dynamic arrays properly for 5 marks, and there's no reason why you should get it wrong. So 2.2, so this is 2.1. So if you want to go 2.2, sure. 2.2, we're going to resize the array. So remember, by now you all should know, you're going to resize your array from the outermost record structure to the innermost record structure. So if you think about it, you start with the players array, because a players array has tournaments in there, and tournaments have par and stroke in there. All right. Okay, so let's look at this. All right. Please note that Mr. Lebier is giving you the Android link. For those of you with an Apple phone or a device, you might need to look at something. I don't know if Foxit also has an iOS version. All right, but let's resize our array. So we begin by redimming our players to NP. That is 1 mark. Then, because each player has tournament array, we need to resize the tournament array for every player. And then inside every tournament, we need to resize the par as well as the strokes array. So over here, we are going to, for P as integer is equal to 1 to NP. And inside there, redim players P dot tourneys to NT. After that, so that is 1, 2, 3. 3 marks there. Then every tournament has 2 arrays that you still need to resize. So how do you do that? We go for T as integer is equal to 1 to N, 1 to NT, and next T. And inside that for loop, I now resize the 2 arrays that are in the tournament. And so we go redim players P dot tourneys T dot pars. Okay, I think pars. Let me see. Par and strokes. Okay, so par, and what is the size there? It is NH, because there are how many holes? The par readings that you've got are determined by how many holes there are. Okay, and the idea is just to get a sense that at each tournament there are, if you think about golf, when people play golf, they actually play a number of holes. So they try to hit the ball into a number of holes across the lawn. Okay, so now redim players P dot tourneys T dot strokes, and there that will be in H as well. So all right, so Mr. Lebier has found that it's Foxit is offered on iOS. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what is different here? What is different here from every other practical you have done before? The only difference here is that there are 2 arrays that you have to resize in the same for loop. That is it. Is this really that much of a train smash? If you had gotten this question next week Friday, and you've never done something like this before, would none of you have been able to figure this out? I don't think so. I think that you would have just apply the rules. What do you know? How would you apply it? That's what it boils down to. That is why we ask you, please don't memorize code. Memorizing code doesn't help. You need to know why you use something, and you need to know when to use it. So this here is basically 5% that we have given you. So looking at this code, this is 7% already. Next, 2.3, we need to set up the UJ grid. Now, we've already indicated that your players are going to be your rows and your tournaments are going to be your columns. So that means we are going to have GRD golf dot rows is equal to n players plus 1. And the reason why we do that, why we know it's not n players, NP, is because we know that it is for the number of players plus 1 for the heading. Then we have grid golf.cols is equal to, and NC, because now we know that NT, because it is the number of tournaments per column. However, how many additional rows and columns do we need? Okay, Emma Artaga, can you ask your question?
Hi, ma'am. I would just like to ask as to when you were defining the grid as grd golf dot row, and then
Yes.
once you resizing it, it's grd golf dot rows. What's the difference between row and rows?
Okay, I'm glad you're asking this question. A little bit worried that you're asking this question now, but glad you're asking it because I know that you're not the only one who's making this mistake. But can anyone else in the group, who wants to volunteer and answer this question? So the question is, what is the difference between row and rows? Okay, RJ Zeta was first, so RJ Zeta, would you like to answer that question?
Okay. When we say GRD in the name of the grid dot rows, we are specifying the number of rows. But when we say row, we are specifying a particular row in that grid.
Okay, perfect answer. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just asking what's the difference, but I understand as to that's how you would code it in your program. But I just wanted to know as to what exactly is the difference between the two.
Okay, well, I think the question has been answered. The difference here, as you said, is this indicates how many rows you want the grid to have, and this one is actually which particular row you wish to go to. Because if you so in other words, this rows and columns plural. The only time you will use this is when you want to set up the grid in terms of I want this grid to have so many rows and so many columns. Please change the size of this grid for me. That's the only time you will use it. You will not use it anywhere else. However, with .row or .col singular, the only time you use it then is when you say, I want to put some text in my grid somewhere. Okay. All right. So now, with regards to the number of columns, we need to figure out how many additional columns there are. Now, by default, we would say it is just +1 because we would have a label column. But if you go here, you can see that, well, the calculate under pars, that would probably be in the space for however many tournaments there are. So that is within the normal rows and columns, okay? But then calculate least under pars is 1. Calculate player classes is 2, okay? And then determine if pattern exists, that is actually displayed in that text box there. So that means it will be 2 additional columns after the end of your last tournament column in my design. So in other words, there are going to be 3 additional columns for the number of columns, cols, in my grid. Now, doing this correctly will give you 2%. Okay, now if you are really not sure and your program keeps crashing, I don't advise it, but if you are really not sure how to do this, then my suggestion to you is just for the sake of making sure that your program does not crash, I would use what is an arbitrarily large number for your rows and columns. So maybe I will say 50, because I know for a fact that I will never have that many number of rows. Okay, but you do know, if you do know, it's +3, leave it at +3. All right. Then the next thing, as we said, is it's going to be question 2.4. So 2.4 over here is where we need to label our UJ grid. And because our players are our rows and our tournaments are our columns, we will then have to have 2 for loops. So we go for P. So P is equal to 1 to NP, next P. And so we can see that as integer is equal to P, and then we say PT. And why do I have PT? Because I've already magically written the subroutine in place for myself. Right, so it is row P, column 0, and then we go player ampersand C string P. Please note that I know some of you are going to be tempted to display the name of the player in your UJ grid. I would advise against it. It's not worth putting in the effort to do that, right? Please note that I exit the for loop. I do not start the other for loop in here. Typically, if I'm going through two-dimensional arrays, which technically this array inside the array is, I should have the for T loop inside the for P loop, but the only place where that is done separately is in your labeling. Okay, so for T as integer is equal to 1 to NT, and we go PT 0 T, and this is tournament ampersand C string T. Okay, now that is 2%. For the final percent, you would need to label everything else, and so we go PT open bracket 0 row 0, because remember we want to put in the final two columns. The second final column would be the least under par, and then the other one is the player class. So this would be NT plus 1 because it is the column right after the last tournament, and we go least under par, and then PT 0 NT plus 2, and this one is the class for the player. All right, and at this point in time, if you want to make sure that everything is working 100% here, then what you can do is you can run your program at this point and then just test it to see that the program doesn't crash in terms of labeling. Remember, you should use values that are different, so you can see, okay, I've got 2 players. Do I have 2 rows here? Do I have 3 tournaments there? Cool. And least under par and class. So you can see that this program up to this point does work. My suggestion to you is please try and write as much of the code as you can and make sure that it works before you proceed to the next point. Try not to spend too much time typing one line of code and running it to see if it works, and then running it again, because this compiling your code does take time, and you might not necessarily have the time to test each and every single line of code. So I would say if you want to really test your program each time, rather complete an entire question before testing your program. Okay, so by writing all this code, I have effectively gotten my marks for this particular question. And then question 3, you could probably have guessed that this would indicate that you need to input the necessary data into the program. Now, please remember it is including data on each tournament, so you need to read in everything up until the total holes under par. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of input need to be provided by your user. Now, if you were to look at this question, this record structure correctly, in order for us to input the information for the par per hole, it means that, oh, look, we are doing it for every single hole. So that is there's a for loop for each hole, but now this par per hole happens to be inside a tournament. And so there is a number of tournaments. So we know that there must be a for loop for every single tournament, and we need to do this for every single player. So in other words, there is a for loop for every single player. So going back here, I am going to double click on the input data, and here I'm going to call this question 3. Okay, input data. Please note that it doesn't matter that your code, funny, when you double click on a button, it basically tries to do this in alphabetical order. It lists your subroutines, the resulting subroutine names, in alphabetical order. So yes, your code is kind of all over the place. If you want to present this code, you can see that question 2 is there and then question 3 is there. If you want to make it easier for your assistants to mark, my suggestion is to take that out, just cut that out and rearrange it so that it is in after 2. So after question 2, so what you can see here is this is the code on question 1. Okay, so I've accidentally pressed the run button again. Question 1 is there. This is followed by question 2, and now we're proceeding to question 3. This will make it easier for us to mark. I'm not going to lie. So having said earlier that we need 3 for loops, I either can declare it the way I have been at this point in time, which is what Mr. Labia likes to do, which is define the variable inside the for loop, or you can go p, t, and h as integer. Those are for my for loops. For p is equal to 1 to np, right, next p, and I'm going to go for t is equal to 1 to nt, next t, and then the last one is for h is equal to 1 to nh, next h. And then now it boils down to you putting the input in the correct for loops. So if we go back to this question, you can see that player name and age belong to each player. So we can ask for the name and the age inside the player loop. Then for the tournament, there's a tournament name that is per tournament. But then the par per hole and the shots per hole, those two belong for in the H loop. Okay, so these two belong in the H loop, this belongs in the T loop, and these two belong in the P loop. So over here, let's actually look through that. Now, Ms. RJ Zeta did ask a question. Let's just see what his comment is. Okay, so RJ Zeta says, I just noticed that in my record structure, I made the class a string. If I had such code and it was on the test, would I lose marks? Yes, unfortunately, if you define your record structures incorrectly, you would lose the marks. Which did you make a string? Which field did you accidentally make a string? You made the class a string. Oh, the player class. All right. Okay, so I think what will likely happen is if you go to your question, maybe while defining your record structure, you made your player class a string, but then as you're reading through and you implement question 7, you'll notice that the player class is 3, 2, 1. And while you're answering that, you realize, oh, actually, this should be an integer instead. So you probably would have picked this up and would have made the changes. So you would have gone back to your design and changed it back to an integer instead. All right. But if you had not picked it up and you kept it as a string, yes, unfortunately, you would lose marks as a result. You would lose marks where you would first and foremost lose marks for declaring your record structure incorrectly. And then you would also lose correctness marks when you get to question 7. So it is a bit of that's why I spend a fair amount of time in the beginning of the questions, because the problem with writing code is this: when you define the ingredients, so to speak, your variables, your various data types, your record structures, as well as your variables, you need to make sure that is defined correctly. Then when it comes to question 2, even though it counts just over 10%, this getting the right dimensions, this here, this is only worth 5%. But if you get this wrong, if you even get one slight little part of this wrong, you wreck your entire program. That's why I think when you write your code for question 2, it is not the time to be lazy. It is the time to really focus intently and make sure you get this 100% correct. Rather make sure that this is 100% correct than go, you know what, I can answer question 7. Question 7 will be incorrect if you get this wrong. So rather get question 2 correct, run it, test it properly, and see that it works. All right. So over here, as we said, players p dot name is equal to input box. And over here, input boxes is what is the name. And typically, I would ask player 1, player 2, player 3, but I'm not going to do that today. Okay, player's age is equal to cint input box. And please note, the idea here for these 2 questions is that we're trying to test, do you know when to use cint, cdbl, and never to use cstring? And the reason why you should never use cstring when you're busy capturing the input is because input box is a string in the first place. All right, so keep that in mind. And then we've got players p dot tourneys t dot name. Right, so this is the name of your tournament. Input box, what is the tournament name. All right, and then remember the last two, which is par as well as the strokes, is now you have to say players p dot tourneys t dot r h equal to c in, because it's an input box. Input box. What is the par for the hole, right? And you would also then do the same for players. P dot tourneys t dot strokes h is equal to c int in box how many strokes for the hole. Right. So over here, you can see we've captured all the information, and at this point in time, perhaps you still don't know what is this par and what is the strokes actually about. It doesn't matter. All you need to do is you are reading in, you're reading in information. Okay, so Beaversono is asking, after uploading revision videos in Blackboard to be downloaded, do you mean the intensive revision videos? Okay, I'm going to let you just type your answer out while I continue. Yes, the intensive revision. Yes, I can do that. I don't know if anyone was still interested, but I will upload the rest of the intensive revision videos onto Blackboard. Otherwise, you can watch them on YouTube, but I suppose some of you want to download the videos. Okay, no problem. I'll make it easier for you to download. All right. I will try and get that done by tomorrow. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's proceed. Now we've got about 4 minutes remaining, so it's going to be a bit difficult to proceed with the next question, which is to perform the calculation. I mean, I can just type the answer out very quickly, but this you know, I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to explain what this next question means. Now, it's a lot of text, I know, but please don't complain that's a lot of reading. In life, you're going to have a lot of reading to do. So what this question here boils down to is this. They say for each tournament of each player, calculate score in field B, Roman numeral 4, and display the total number of holes where the player played under par. Now, that is just a normal sentence. Okay, sorry, that's just a normal sentence that you got. So you know that it must be a calculation for each tournament and for each player. Okay, and they say display the total number of holes where the player played under par. What does that actually mean? So in order for those of you who are not into golf, I am one such person, but the student came up with this idea, so I had to learn. To better explain, so you can see that you don't have to then go, oh, I don't know what's going on. Let me go on the internet and find out. There's no need for you to go on the internet and look for anything. The questions will tell you everything. So here it says, to better explain, there is an expected number of shots that a player is expected to make to get a ball into a hole. So if you think about any golf game that you may have seen, you see the people swinging their clubs and just hitting their ball off into the distance, right? Now, if you're a really bad player, the idea is probably you're going to hit that ball a lot of times before you finally nudge that ball into the hole. Okay, remember, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of the phrase hole in one. What that means is that the player just goes, swings the club, and the ball goes whee, and then it lands into the hole all on it in one go. That is impressive. That's a hole in one. And so when they talk about the number of shots that a player is expected to make to get a ball into a hole, this is actually a par. That refers to the par. So to further explain, for example, hole 1, so at hole 1 at the tournament for a certain player, hole 1 has a par of 4. This means that a player should take 4 strokes. So in other words, they will hit the club 4 times. They've got 4 chances to get the ball into the hole. All right, and then however, the player took 6 shots to achieve this. This means that the player was not under par, rather over it. And then for hole 2, the player was under par because they took 2 shots when the expected shots were 4. So on a certain hole, they might say, well, here are 4. There are 4. The par is 4, so we expect you to be able to get the ball into the hole using four shots and you took 2, then it means it was under par. But if you took 6 or 8 or more, that means that you really suck at it and you were not over par. All right, so hole 3 was also not under par as the player took exactly 3 shots. And this actually is in reference to the data here. The par was 4, they took 6, so that's not under. 4, 2, so it was under. 3, 3 is not under. 4, 4 at the last one is not under. And that's just to explain the concept of this question for you in question 4. All right, so we're going to do this tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow. We'll proceed with this in question with the lecture on Wednesday. However, there's been a request to explain practical 10 question 7. Mr. Labia, would you mind taking over explaining this question 7 for me? I've got a meeting with one of my honors students now in about 5 minutes. Mr. Labia?
Not a problem. I've got it open this side. Was it question 7 or was it question 4?
Yeah, I think everyone's asking about question 7. Well, okay. K.S. Lichman's asking question 4. So can you try and cover question 4 and question 7 for B. Masondo as well? All right. Okay. So I'm going to keep recording, Mr. Labia. You can stop the recording after you're done. I am now just going to leave the session. I'll see everyone again tomorrow and on Wednesday and so on. But well, I'll see the tutorial people tomorrow. All right. Okay, I am leaving. Mr. Labia, your turn.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's try and wrap this up. As Prof. Ling has already mentioned, we don't have a lot of time. So I'll start with question 4. So question 4 says, each offering for each product, calculate, store, and display the total profits of the offering. This is this average. So what it's telling me here is, unfortunately, I haven't downloaded it. So it is still online, as you can see, so I can't highlight much, but over here it says what you need to get from it is we're calculating an average. Okay, must be displayed to exactly 2 decimal places. So the 2 decimal places means you must use the format command. So profit is calculated by working out the cost. So you need to work out the cost. In this case, the cost is the number of units sold multiplied by the size, which is then multiplied by the cost per liter. Okay, and subtracting the cost from the total units sold, then you multiply this by the selling price per unit. So what I noticed is some of you guys said you are getting negative values for this. You can get negative values because, as you can see, the cost is the number of units that you sold. You multiply that by the size of the units and then multiply that by the cost to produce per liter. So from there, you're going to subtract this from the total units sold multiplied by the selling price per unit. So it is possible that at the end of the day, you have made a negative profit because you haven't sold enough to make a positive profit. Okay, have I explained this question enough? So the fact that you might be getting a negative value is okay. All that means is you need to go back and look at your test data and give it enough test data in such a way that it will allow for a positive number. So as long as you do it by the calculation, as long as you make a cost according to this information, and then you subtract that number from the total units sold multiplied by the selling price per unit. So it's 2 different things. You've got your cost, which is going to be the units sold times the size times the cost it takes to produce per liter. You're going to subtract the cost from the total units sold multiplied by the selling price per unit. And also at the bottom here, it tells you that you get 5 marks for the calculation, 3 marks for the decimal places, and the correctness, you get 8 marks. Okay, so question 7, the best advice I can give you guys is, I'm not going to give you the answer. The best advice I can give you is just break it down into multiple pieces. Okay, so for each paint product, store, display the paint rating. This is calculated by evaluating 1/10 of the least profitable offering of the paint product. So you're going to have to use the divide function you created up top, and as follows, use a select case. So in the case that the profit is between 0 and 100, you're going to get A. In between B, in between 100 and 1,000, it's B. Higher than 1,000, it's C. So which part of this question don't you understand? B, Mason. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Yes.
Yes, here you see it say 1/10 of least profitable offering profit. You see the part. And
yeah.
Can you please explain for me that part? 1/10 of least profitable offering or profit.
Okay. The question says this is calculated by evaluating 1/10 of the least profitable offering. So which means you're going to pass the least profitable offering into this function that you created on top there. And then it will divide it by 10, where you get a tenth of the least profitable offering. So if you have 10 offerings, let's say if you have 5 offerings and the first offering is the one with the least profit, you're going to take that one's profit, divide that by 10. But the divide by 10, you don't need to worry about in question 7, because in question 6, it says you need to define a function called divide by 10, which will take in a double value and return a tenth of it. So you're going to use this function in number 6 to get a tenth of the least profitable case.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we're out of time, but EO Omar says, will the mark sheets be informed that question 8 is not compulsory? Yes, the markers will be informed. It will not, it will even not show up in your mark sheet. So they won't even if they try and mark it, they will have nowhere to give you marks for it. What if the least profitable is a negative? At the end of the day, the only thing we're looking for is the least profitable. So you can still get a tenth of a negative number. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any further questions, please send them to the Discord channel. We are unfortunately out of time. And if it does not, okay, you're saying it does not fit the range. Okay, yes, you are right, because it says from 0 to 100. Then it will not display anything. So that's why you need to make sure that when you're running your test data, it does not end up giving you negative values. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any further questions, please just put them in the Discord channel and they'll try to help you there. Unfortunately, we're out of time and shall see you guys tomorrow during the tutorial. So if you are in tomorrow's tutorial, please reserve your questions for tomorrow's tutorial as well. We'll try and cover them there. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.